Hey guys, my name is Jin and I use they them pronouns. Luckily, while I was born and raised in a Spanish speaking household, I mostly grew up speaking English. I got exposed to non binary people pretty early in my life, and it was really easy for me to adopt pronouns to fit my own gender identity. In their article, Pronouns and Possibilities, Law Zimin talks about the importance and how English is slowly shifting its gendered language to a more trans inclusive one. How instead of mother and father, we can simply say parent. We can say partner instead of girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband. There's words like mailman and chairman. There are so many words which can be very easily switched to an inclusive, gender neutral form. This, however, is relatively easy for us English speakers since we're simply taking words that already exist in our language and are assigning them an additional meaning. This led me to think about how non binary pronouns may work in other languages, such as those that heavily rely on gender, such as Spanish or French. So, non binary people in countries that speak these languages, that they're speaking a language where gender is visible in every sentence, affect their experiences of being able to fully express their non binary identity? Is there a possibility of tying in the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis into this? To put it rather simply, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is the general idea of how one's language may affect one's perceptions or experience of the world. It's how he said that Eskimos have many words for snow because that's what they experience. So here's where my two friends Pip and Ku come along. They are both bilingual and genderqueer, so through a series of questions about their language, identity, and country, I wanted to compare how their two different languages have affected their personal realizations of gender. Let's focus on Pip for now. They live in Brazil, speak Portuguese, and identify as gender fluid. Portuguese is a language which uses gender not only their pronouns, but even inanimate objects, such as a chair, has a gender. Because of this, one can only imagine how difficult it may be for a gender fluid individual to be able to fully express their gender identity. Pip mentions how many times they try to mumble out the endings of words to avoid declaring a gender, and they also simply accept whatever pronouns people use for them. Since it's usually she, they mention how happy they get when someone actually uses he. This made me remember about Kira Hall's research on the Hijras in India and how they generally prefer to use feminine pronouns as opposed to their assigned masculine ones. It seems like the languages that are missing a gender-neutral pronoun seem to rely on the pronoun opposite of their assigned sex. Pip also mentions how it wasn't until they started learning English, which was also around the same time they started to question their gender, that they realized that there were gender-neutral pronouns such as they and them. They were very happy to adopt something that felt they suited them perfectly. Ku, however, presents a different story. Ku lives in Japan, speaks Japanese, and identifies as agender. While Japanese does have pronouns, they really aren't used in everyday conversation and instead use each other's names, so therefore it's very easy for someone to avoid using them. It's a language that is more concerned with hierarchy, making sure you're polite to the right people, than it is a language dependent on gender such as Portuguese. They also mention how Japanese differs from English because they find more ways to be able to express themselves. There are ways to sound more masculine, feminine, formal, casual, or even cute. Because of this, Ku explains how their experience with expressing their identity has been very positive. Seeing how these two individuals have shared their own experiences based on their language, I realized that my data kind of represents the Sapir-Whorf viewpoint. We have Pip who grew under the gender-dependent language and wasn't able to express their identity through it. Because of this, they had a relatively negative experience and are still insecure about their gender when speaking in Portuguese. It wasn't until finding another language which included gender-neutral pronouns that they were able to explore and expand their vocabulary, following in the expansion of their gender identity. On the other side, we have Ku, who did not have a very gender-dependent language and felt as if they were able to express their gender identity from a very early point. In a language that focuses more on formalities rather than gender, they did not feel many societal pressures to pick a side, therefore had a very positive experience in being able to express their agender identity. They do not feel as if speaking their own language inhibits them from being able to express their gender. However, seeing how these situations can very easily fit in a Sapir-Whorf mindset, it's very easy to automatically put a, well, that works on it and call it a day. We have to, however, take a step back and see if there are any other aspects of these individuals which might affect their experiences. Just as Guy Deutscher says in their article, Does your language shape how you think? There really is no evidence that any language forbids its speaker to think anything. Perhaps the culture, class, generation, or religion may have something more to do with it than the language itself. Let's take my family into account. We have two parents who spoke only Spanish up until their 20s or 30s, then got introduced to English. Well, one of them accepts non-binary identity and the other one kinda doesn't. Then we have three siblings. Two of them were born speaking Spanish, though heavily rely on English after going through education in English, while the last one really only speaks English. Well, two of them accept the gender spectrum, while the other one doesn't. How does this affect my experience? Well, that's pretty complicated and a story for another time. So everyone's different, everyone's situations are different, and language does not simply live in a vacuum and spit out identical minds. So how do you know? How do you know if someone is male, female, or anything in between, and how do you know their experiences? Well, why not just try asking for their pronouns?